The massive intergalactic vessel Unity hummed with activity as members of various species moved through its stark white corridors. The ship's gentle vibration beneath Staff Sergeant Kim's boots felt almost comforting after 3 months of planetary deployment. She brushed a strand of black hair from her face and straightened her blue-gray uniform, the Silver Earth Defense Force insignia catching the light. Around her, the corridor traffic was a living museum of the galaxy's diversity. The tall, willowy Eleran diplomats with their shimmering skin, the squat Burren engineers whose forearms moved with precise efficiency, and even a pair of rarely seen mistwalkers, their semi-transparent bodies flowing like liquid crystal. Kim had earned her rest period. The rescue operation on Nadar Colony, Seven had left her with healing radiation burns across her back and shoulders, wounds the medical officer said would have killed most species. Humans, with their odd radiation resilience, had once again surprised the galactic community. The mess hall doors slid open with a soft hiss. Unlike the sterile corridors, the vast chamber buzzed with life and color. Holographic menus flickered. Above food dispensers, programmed with recipes from 100 worlds, the mingled scents of alien cuisines created a bizarre but not unpleasant atmosphere. Spicy Terran curries, competing with the sweet fungal broths favored by the methane-breathing Cindy. Kim's eyes scanned the crowded tables, looking for a place to sit. Most of the human contingent was still on duty, and the remaining tables were occupied by various alien groups who preferred to stick with their own kind. Only one table had space, a corner spot where 5 Nadar warriors were gathered, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the lights. The Nadar were an intimidating sight, standing nearly 7 feet tall with 4 arms and bodies protected. By natural armor plates, they resembled earth insects evolved to massive proportions. Their compound eyes reflected light like polished gemstones, and their mandibles clicked softly as they communicated. Unlike most species who used universal translators, the Nadar often preferred their own language when among themselves. Kim wasn't intimidated. After fighting alongside them against the swarm, she knew Nadar warriors were disciplined and honorable, if rigidly formal. She approached their table, food tray in hand. "Permission to join?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral and respectful. The largest Nadar turned, compound eyes focusing on her with an unsettling intensity. Commander Tul was legendary even among his own kind. His exoskeleton bore the ritual scarification of 30 successful campaigns, and one of his secondary arms was a cybernetic replacement, lost during the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where human and Nadar forces had fought together for the first time. Rather than respond, Tul extended his primary right limb, blocking her path to the empty seat. The sharp edges of his natural armor plates gleamed dangerously in the light. His mandibles clicked rapidly, not using his translator, deliberately excluding her from whatever he was communicating to his warriors. The mess hall's ambient noise faded as nearby diners noticed the confrontation. Humans and aliens alike watched, sensing the potential diplomatic incident unfolding. 3 maintenance robots hovering nearby changed their illumination from blue to yellow, their conflict avoidance. Protocols activating. Kim remained standing, her expression carefully controlled. Inside, her mind raced through options. Backing away would show weakness, something the Nadar interpreted as unworthiness. Forcing her way past would violate their complex honor codes. Challenging Tul directly would escalate the situation. Beyond recovery, a slender Arcturian diplomat at a nearby table slowly reached for her communication device, likely preparing to alert security. 2 human officers halfway across the room had noticed and were setting down their trays, preparing to intervene. The 5 Nadar warriors watched Kim with their unreadable compound eyes. The smallest, though still towering over her, shifted, his upper body in what might have been discomfort. The others remained motionless, their exoskeletons catching the light as they awaited her response. Through the viewport behind the Nadar table, the swirling purple storms of the Carina Nebula provided a dramatic backdrop to the confrontation. The Unity had been stationed at this frontier for months, maintaining the uneasy peace between a dozen species, with ancient grudges and fresh wounds from the Swarm War. Kim thought of her brother who hadn't survived that war, of the promise she'd made at his memorial to carry on his belief that different species could work together. She thought of the Nadar civilians she'd helped evacuate from their failing habitat dome just weeks ago, how their rigid protocols had nearly doomed them until her team intervened with typical human improvisation. A maintenance bot floated closer, its sensors detecting rising body temperatures and stress pheromones. "Assistance required," it chirped in a pleasant artificial voice. "No assistance needed," Kim said calmly, never breaking eye contact with Tool. Instead of anger or challenge, she kept her posture neutral and respectful. The burns across her shoulders, earned rescuing Nadar civilians, throbbed beneath her uniform. But she didn't flinch or show discomfort. She simply stood, tray in hand, waiting with a patience that few humans were known for. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in such a charged moment. Throughout the mess hall, conversations had stopped. A Gavarian chef had paused in mid-preparation of a flame-grilled dish, the blue cooking fire still dancing above the food. Even the ship's environmental system seemed to have quieted, as if the Unity itself was holding its breath. 3 years had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Council, a milestone many humans never expected to see in their lifetimes. Kim remembered the day clearly, standing in the rain with thousands of others in Seoul Central Plaza, watching the massive holographic display as Earth's representatives signed the accords. Some people cheered, others wept, but everyone understood that humanity had finally stepped onto the galactic stage. The reality proved far more complicated than the celebration suggested. Kim gazed steadily at Commander Tool, whose blocking arm remained extended between her and the empty seat. Behind him, through the viewport, a small maintenance craft drifted past, its repair drones extending like glowing fingers against the backdrop of stars. 3 years of diplomacy, and still this tension remained, a divide wider than the space between worlds. In the early days after first contact, humans had been welcomed with cautious curiosity by most council species. The elegant luminari had been fascinated by human art and music. The aquatic Merin had appreciated human adaptability. Even the insectoid Vrax had found common ground in human social structures, but the Nadar had been different from the start. "Your species lacks natural armor," a Nadar ambassador had announced during the first official meeting. "Your muscles generate insufficient force. Your sensory organs are primitive. Your lifespans are brief." These weren't insults in Nadar culture, merely statements of fact. They couldn't understand how such deficient creatures had achieved space travel before extinction. Then came the swarm. Kim's hand unconsciously drifted to the small hollow locket at her throat, which contained her brother's image. Park had died during the Battle of Europa, when the swarm first entered the solar system. Like thousands of other humans, he had volunteered to fight an enemy that had already devoured 11 civilizations across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. The Council, racers had expected Earth to fall within weeks. Instead, the war dragged on for 18 months. What humans lacked in natural armor, they made up for with ingenuity. While Nadar warriors fought with rigid discipline and ancient battle formations, human forces constantly adapted, improvised, and violated military conventions that the older species considered immutable. Pilots flew suicide runs to test swarm defenses. Engineers repurposed civilian technology for combat applications overnight. Scientists worked without sleep to decode swarm communication patterns. A holographic advertisement flickered near the mess hall ceiling, showing the latest council tourism campaign. "Visit magnificent Earth where tradition meets innovation." The irony wasn't lost on Kim. To the council races, humans were both fascinating and alarming, creatures who seemed to thrive on breaking rules and defying expectations. The Nadar, with their exoskeleton-protected bodies, and their civilization, built on unchanging traditions stretching back 30,000 years, found humans particularly difficult to categorize. During the war, Nadar commanders had initially refused to incorporate human tactics into their battle plans, considering them dishonorable or foolishly risky. By the war's end, however, even the Nadar had been forced to acknowledge that human unpredictability had helped turn the tide. "Your brother was at the Europa defense," Tool suddenly said in heavily accented standard English, his translator apparently reactivated. His compound eyes shifted slightly, taking in the hollow locket at Kim's throat. Third Fleet, the shield breakers. Kim's surprise must have shown on her face. We study your battles, Tool continued, arms still blocking her path. The tactic used, sacrificing smaller vessels to create openings for torpedo strikes, violated 6 principles of the ancient combat. Codes no Nadar commander would have conceived it. But it worked, Kim said quietly. It worked, Tool agreed, mandibles clicking softly. Many Nadar warriors live because of it, yet we would not have done the same. Around them, the mess hall remained unnaturally quiet. At a nearby table, a maintenance robot politely offered drink. Refills, its cheerful programming creating an odd contrast against the tension. 2 security drones hovered discreetly near the ceiling, their sensors undoubtedly monitoring the exchange. Kim had volunteered for the Unity assignment specifically because it included Nadar crew members. Her brother had believed that humanity's future depended on building genuine understanding with all Council species, even the most difficult ones. His last message home had been about a Nadar officer who had saved his life during a skirmish, sacrificing an arm to pull him from wreckage. That's why I'm here, Kim thought. Not just to honor Park's memory, but to continue the work he believed in. The Nadar cultural orientation briefing had been extensive. Their society operated on complex honor codes and ritualized interactions that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia. Every gesture carried meaning. Every word had precise weight. To the Nadar, humans seemed chaotic and unpredictable, qualities that made them both useful allies and potentially dangerous friends. Tool's blocking gesture wasn't merely about a mess hall seat. It represented the ongoing test of whether humans could understand and respect proper interstellar protocol, whether these unpredictable, armorless creatures could be trusted with the power and technology that came with Council membership. A young communications officer from Earth's Australian region had learned this lesson the hard way last month. He'd admired a Nadar warrior's ceremonial dagger and asked to hold it, not realizing that in Nadar culture, weapons could only be touched by those who had earned the right through combat. The resulting diplomatic incident had required Admiral Lee's personal intervention to resolve. Through the viewport behind Tool, the spectacular rings of a nearby gas giant glowed with reflected starlight. A Council science vessel moved slowly through the rings, its collection arms extended to gather ice samples. The Unity had been assigned to escort the science mission, humans and Nadar working together to protect researchers from half a dozen worlds, working together, but not truly understanding each other. Kim maintained her calm stance, tray still held steady in her hands. She could feel the healing burns across her shoulders, a reminder of why understanding was worth the effort. During the rescue operation on Nadar Colony 7, she'd seen firsthand what happened when different species couldn't collaborate effectively. The colony's atmospheric regulators had failed during a solar storm, and the Nadar evacuation had proceeded according to their ancient protocols, methodical, organized, and far too slow for the emergency. Her human rescue team had improvised, breaking every rule in the Nadar Emergency Response Manual. They'd repurposed mining equipment to stabilize failing habitat domes, used maintenance tunnels as emergency evacuation routes, and modified environmental suits to fit Nadar bodies when proper equipment ran short. The Nadar administrators had been horrified by these violations of procedure. But when the final report was filed, not a single life had been lost. "Your methods are disturbing," a Nadar official had told her afterward, "but effective." From a Nadar, this was extraordinary praise. As they stood in tense silence, the ambient sounds of the mess hall seemed to fade. The gentle hum of the Unity's massive engines, usually unnoticeable background noise, now felt like a physical presence. Through the viewport, a small fleet of maintenance drones swarmed over the ship's outer hull, their work lights blinking like artificial stars against the vastness of space. Commander Tool remained motionless, his armored limb still blocking Kim's path to the empty seat. His compound eyes, incapable of blinking, reflected the overhead lights in fractured patterns. The other Nadar warriors at the table had gone completely still, a defensive posture their species adopted during moments of heightened awareness. Something caught Tool's attention. His head tilted slightly, compound eyes focusing on Kim's uniform. Pocket. Attached to the standard issue fabric was something so unusual aboard a modern spacecraft that it stood out like a beacon, a small piece of actual paper. In an age of holographic displays, neural interfaces, and quantum data storage, physical writing materials had become museum curiosities. Most spacefaring species considered them primitive artifacts, impractical reminders of evolutionary stages long outgrown. The Luminari found paper especially baffling. Their own history had evolved directly from telepathic communication to digital storage, skipping physical writing entirely. Yet there it was, a folded square of white material, visibly worn at the edges from handling, attached to Kim's pocket with a simple metal clip. The incongruity of this ancient technology aboard the most advanced joint-species vessel ever constructed seemed to momentarily override the cultural standoff. Tull's blocking arm shifted position, no longer a barrier, but now gesturing toward the paper with a questioning motion. The movement was subtle, the slightest rotation of his upper arm segment, but in the elaborate body language of the Nadar, it represented a significant shift from challenge to inquiry. A service drone hovered, briefly near their table, sensors assessing the situation before determining no refreshments were required. It moved away with a soft electronic chirp, its anti-gravity field leaving a momentary distortion in the air. Kim recognized the opening. With careful movements that wouldn't be misinterpreted as aggressive, she reached for the paper. The mess. Hall remained unnaturally quiet. Dozens of different species watching this unexpected turn in what they had assumed would be either a diplomatic incident or a humiliating retreat. "It was given to me after the Colony 7 evacuation," Kim said, keeping her voice neutral as she unfolded the paper with deliberate care. "I haven't shown it to anyone else." The paper made a slight crinkling sound, an alien noise aboard, a ship where nearly everything was designed to be silent. Kim placed it flat on the table's surface, oriented toward Tull. The page contained a child's drawing, created with what appeared to be colored wax sticks, another ancient technology, preserved only for educational purposes. The image was simple but unmistakable. A human hand, 5-fingered and unarmored, clasped with a Nadar claw, 4-digited and exoskeleton-covered. Above the drawing were words in 2 scripts, Human Standard and a simplified version of the complex geometric patterns used in Nadar writing. The message was the same in both languages. "Thank you for saving my father." At a nearby table, an Eloran diplomat whispered something to her companion, their luminescent skin pulsing with pale blue light, a sign of emotional interest. 2 human technicians paused with food halfway to their mouths. A maintenance bot, sensing the unusual situation, hovered nearby with its conflict resolution protocols on standby. Recognition flashed in Tull's compound eyes, a subtle change in how light reflected from their faceted surfaces. His upper body straightened by several degrees, and his mandibles clicked once in what those familiar with Nadar expressions would recognize as surprise. "You saved Krenvas," Tull said, his translator giving the words a flat quality that couldn't capture the complex harmonics of his native speech. "From Habitat Dome 4. Kim nodded once. "Our team evacuated 16 Nadar civilians from that section after the primary supports failed. The atmosphere was already venting when we arrived." What she didn't add, what military reports later confirmed, was that the radiation levels in that section had already exceeded safe exposure limits for humans. The specialized Nadar environmental suits, designed for their unique biology, had been damaged in the initial disaster. Her team had gone in with standard human protection, knowing the risk. Through the viewport behind Tull, the magnificent gas giant that the locals called Viridian filled nearly a quarter of the visible sky. Its swirling storm bands of amber and emerald created a constantly shifting backdrop to the scene. A small council research vessel could be seen entering the planet's upper atmosphere, its heat shields beginning to glow as it descended to study the unusual life forms that floated among the gas clouds. One of the other Nadar warriors leaned forward slightly, mandibles moving in the complex patterns of their native speech. The translation came through a moment later. The child who drew this, what was its designation? "His name is Tick," Kim answered, He was very concerned about his father. He stayed by his side throughout the medical evacuation. The smallest detail, referring to the child with a pronoun rather than it, didn't go unnoticed by the Nadar. Their own language made no such distinctions, viewing offspring as undeveloped entities until they reached warrior age. That Kim recognized the child's individuality represented either a translation error or a deeper understanding of Nadar family structures than most humans possessed. Tool's secondary arms moved in a pattern that his translator didn't convert to. Speech, a private communication to his warriors. Their postures shifted in response, exoskeletons making faint clicking sounds as they adjusted their positions around the table. Krenvas is my clutch brother, Tool said finally. His offspring. Tick is my responsibility if harm comes to Krenvas. This is our way. The information hung in the air between them. In human terms, Tool was revealing that Kim had saved his brother and nephew, but Nadar family structures were far more complex than simple biological relationships. A clutch brother represented not just shared ancestry, but shared honor, shared responsibility, and shared consequences. By their ancient codes, Tool now carried a debt that could not be easily discharged. The paper on the table seemed to gain weight with this new context, its significance transforming from a simple child's thank you to something far more profound in Nadar culture. A slight vibration ran through the floor as the Unity's massive engines adjusted their output, compensating for gravitational interference from the nearby gas giant. The lighting dimmed momentarily, then returned to normal intensity. Through another viewport, the distant star that warmed this system could be seen, a blue-white point of brilliance that cast its light across 12 worlds and countless smaller bodies. The young one's artistic skills are undeveloped, said another Nadar warrior, gesturing toward the drawing with one secondary arm. The translation couldn't capture the subtle harmonics that indicated this was not criticism, but something closer to affectionate observation. He insisted on using real paper and coloring sticks, Kim explained. Apparently he learned in cultural studies that humans once used these methods for important communications. He wanted it to be authentic, a flicker of something, perhaps the Nadar equivalent of amusement, passed between the warriors. Their rigid society placed enormous value on proper forms and ancient traditions. That a Nadar child would adopt human historical methods to create authentic communication represented a cultural crossover that few would have predicted. Tool's compound eyes remained fixed on the drawing, particularly the depicted hands, one human, one Nadar, clasped together. Such physical contact between species was rare outside of emergency situations. Most species preferred to maintain their own cultural norms around personal space and interaction. 3 months earlier, the emergency alert had blared through the Unity's corridors, interrupting the artificial night cycle. Kim had been deep in sleep when her comm unit erupted with the urgent 3-tone signal that indicated civilian distress. She'd been on her feet and pulling on her uniform before fully awake, muscle memory from years of emergency response training taking over. Nadar civilian transport vessel suffering catastrophic system failures, announced the ship's AI as Kim sprinted toward the shuttle bay. All emergency response teams report for immediate deployment. This is not a drill. The briefing had been brief and grim. The Veshila, a mid-sized Nadar civilian vessel carrying around 60 passengers, had suffered multiple cascading failures after passing through an uncharted radiation belt. Their shields had collapsed, hull integrity was compromised in multiple sections, and life support was failing. Most critically, the ship's automated safety systems had malfunctioned, sealing some passengers in compartments that were rapidly losing atmosphere. Kim had assembled her team of 8 human emergency responders while en route. The Unity's shuttle cut through the darkness of space, its engines pushed beyond recommended power levels. Through the viewports, they could see the stricken Nadar vessel, a once elegant craft now drifting awkwardly with visible damage along its port side. Flashes of electrical discharge pulsed intermittently across its hull, indicating severe power system damage. Their design is compartmentalized, Kim had explained, projecting the ship schematic over the shuttle's central table. Each section can be sealed off in an emergency. The good news is, this prevents total atmosphere loss. The bad news is the system malfunction has trapped civilians in sections that are either losing pressure or experiencing radiation leaks. The nadar emergency crews had already deployed, but they were following their standard procedures, methodical, precise and far too slow for the deteriorating situation. Kim's team watched as the nadar responders moved in perfect formation toward the main airlock, carrying identical equipment sets and preparing to execute textbook rescue maneuvers. They'll never reach the inner compartments in time, Lee, Kim's second-in-command, had noted grimly. Their rescue protocols require securing each section before moving to the next. Kim studied the schematics again, noting the maintenance tunnels that ran between the main compartments. Space is too small for the larger nadar rescuers, but potentially navigable by humans. We're going in through the secondary systems. Maintenance. Shafts, coolant, ducts, whatever gets us to those trapped passengers fastest. As their shuttle docked with one of the Veshlar's emergency ports, the ship's condition had visibly worsened. The hull plating near the radiation leak had begun to discolor, and emergency lighting flickered erratically throughout the visible sections. The nadar rescue coordinator, a veteran named Grax, had been incredulous at Kim's proposed approach. The maintenance systems are not designed for emergency access, he'd objected, his translator struggling to convey his alarm. The radiation levels exceed safety parameters. Your environmental suits are inadequate for such exposure. Then we'll work fast, Kim had replied, already distributing specialized tools to her team. The interior of the stricken vessel had been chaos. Emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing red. The ship's warning systems blared in the complex harmonic patterns of nadar emergency code. Smoke filled some corridors where electrical systems had overheated, and the artificial gravity fluctuated unpredictably. Kim's team had split into pairs, each tackling different sections of the vessel. The maintenance tunnels proved even tighter than expected, barely large enough for a human in an environmental suit to squeeze through. The nadar, with their rigid exoskeletons and larger frames, could never have managed the narrow passages. Section 3 secured, 4 civilians evacuated. Lee's voice had crackled over the comm as Kim wormed her way through a junction tube barely wider than her shoulders. Heat from the damaged systems radiated through her suit, and her radiation detector beeped a steady warning. Kim had reached Habitat Dome 4 to find a nightmare scenario. The dome's structural integrity was failing, with visible cracks spreading across its transparent ceiling. Outside, the cold void of space waited. Inside, 6 nadar civilians huddled in emergency breathing apparatus. Among them was an adult male, with a clearly broken limb and a small child clinging to his side. Unity Rescue Team, Kim had announced, her translator converting her words to nadar speech patterns. We need to evacuate immediately. This section could decompress at any moment. The injured nadar, she would later learn this was Kren Vass, struggled to rise. The emergency exit is sealed, he explained, gesturing toward the main door, with his uninjured arm. The backup systems failed. We are following procedure and awaiting proper rescue. Kim's radiation detector had stopped beeping and switched to a continuous tone, the warning that maximum safe exposure levels had been exceeded. The small maintenance tube she'd used to enter was barely visible behind a damaged console, certainly not designed for nadar bodies. New procedure, Kim had said, moving quickly to examine the sealed main door. We're getting everyone out through alternative routes. The child, Tick, had watched her with the unblinking stare of nadar compound eyes. Unlike adult nadar, whose exoskeletons had hardened into rigid plates, younger nadar had more flexible armor that wouldn't reach full density until adolescence. This gave Kim an idea. The adults can't fit through the maintenance tubes, she'd explained to her team over the comm. We need to force the main door, and we need to hurry. This dome is going to fail within minutes. What followed was a desperate race against time. Using tools designed for human emergency services rather than nadar specifications, Kim's team had managed to create a manual override for the sealed door. The process released a shower of sparks and caustic smoke as alien systems were forced to operate in ways their designers never intended. The dome's ceiling had developed spiderweb fractures that grew visibly with each passing minute. Occasional pings and creaks echoed through the chamber as structural elements reached their breaking points. The adult Nadar remained eerily calm, their cultural conditioning against showing distress evident even in this extreme situation. When the door finally shuddered open halfway, just enough for the Nadar civilians to squeeze through, Kim had organized their evacuation in order of mobility. The uninjured adults went first, followed by those with minor injuries. Krenvas with his broken limb would be the last adult, with Kim helping him navigate the partially opened door. But young Tik had refused to leave his father's side, chittering, in rapid Nadar speech that the translator couldn't keep up with. Time was running out. A large crack had now extended across the entire dome, and the environmental systems were screaming warnings in both Nadar and standard languages. Alki. Carry him, Kim had decided, gesturing toward Tik. You focus on moving safely with your injury. Krenvas had hesitated. In Nadar culture, children were never separated from their genetic contributors during emergency situations. It was an ancient instinct, hardwired into their collective consciousness. But a sudden explosive decompression, in an adjacent compartment, had made the decision for them. The entire vessel shuddered, and the crack above them widened ominously. Go, Kim ordered, scooping up the small Nadar child, whose weight was considerably more than a human child of similar size would have been. Even with the reduced gravity from the failing systems, Tik was a heavy burden. They'd made it through the door just as the dome's integrity failed completely. The explosive decompression created a backdraft that slammed the emergency door shut, behind them, catching Kim's environmental suit and tearing the outer layer. Warning indicators immediately flashed across her heads-up display. As radiation protection dropped to minimal levels, the evacuation route back to the shuttle had been a blur of emergency lighting, blaring alarms, and the labored breathing of injured Nadar. Kim had carried Tik the entire way, even as her radiation exposure levels climbed into the critical zone. The child had remained completely still in her arms, not out of fear, but in the instinctive Nadar response that minimized movement when being transported in emergency situations. Back aboard the Unity, the medical bay had been overwhelmed with Nadar civilians from the Veshla. Kim had handed Tik over to medical personnel before collapsing herself, the radiation sickness already beginning to affect her system. Her last conscious memory before the medical team had placed her in radiation treatment was of the small Nadar child standing perfectly still beside his father's treatment pod, compound eyes fixed on her face. The mess hall remained frozen in silence as Tool straightened to his full height, towering over Kim. His exoskeleton caught the light streaming in from the viewport where the massive gas giant Viridian dominated the view, its swirling storms creating patterns of amber and emerald against the darkness of space. Every being in the hall, humans, Nadar, and a dozen other species, seemed to hold their breath. A maintenance drone hovered uncertainly nearby, its sensors detecting the unusual social dynamics, but unable to determine if intervention was required. It bobbed slightly in place, waiting. Tool's compound eyes reflected the overhead lights as he studied Kim's face. Then, in a movement so unexpected that several Nadar at nearby tables clicked their mandibles in surprise, Commander Tool performed the gesture of honor, a ceremonial movement reserved only for equals in battle. His forearms moved in perfect synchronization, primary limbs crossing at the chest, while secondary limbs extended outward, palms up in the ancient posture that predated even Nadar spaceflight. For a Nadar commander to perform this gesture toward a human was unprecedented. The Unity's AI recording systems would later mark this moment with a special tag in the ship's historical archives. The debt of preservation cannot be calculated, Tool said, his translator giving the ritual words a flatness that belied their significance. The continuation of a lineage outweighs all measures of honor. With deliberate care, he picked up the child's drawing from the table. The paper made a soft, crinkling sound, alien and ancient amid the hum of advanced technology. Tool attached it to his own honor sash, the decorated band worn diagonally across his chest armor that displayed his battle achievements and clan markings. In Nadar culture, only the greatest accomplishments earned a place on the honor sash. Some warriors lived their entire lives without adding a single token to their sash. That tool would place a child's drawing there, and a human child's drawing at that, represented a cultural shift beyond what any diplomatic negotiation had, accomplished in 3 years of careful talks. The other Nadar warriors at the table rose to their full height, towering over most species in the mess hall. As one, they performed a simplified version of the honor gesture, acknowledgement of Kim's new status in their eyes. Their exoskeletons clicked softly as they moved, a sound that human crew members had once found unsettling but that now seemed simply part of the Unity's daily symphony of alien noises. Through the secondary viewport, a Council diplomatic vessel glided into view, its crystalline propulsion system leaving a trail of iridescent particles that briefly formed complex geometric patterns before dissipating into space. The ship's arrival seemed symbolic, a reminder of the larger mission they all served aboard the Unity. Kim inclined her head slightly, the human gesture acknowledging the honor without appearing weak or overly deferential. The radiation burns. Across her shoulders and back, still healing after 3 months, tingled beneath her uniform, a physical reminder of the bridge she'd unwittingly built between species. "I would be honored to join you," she said simply, her voice carrying in the hushed mess hall. Commander Toole moved his blocking arm aside and gestured to the empty seat with a formality that transformed a simple mess hall table into something resembling a ceremonial gathering. Kim set her tray down and took her place among the Nadar warriors, the first human to ever do so voluntarily aboard the Unity. From a corner table, a small figure watched the proceedings with unblinking compound eyes. Young Tik, the Nadar child, Kim had carried to safety, sat with his fully recovered father, Krenvas. The child's flexible exoskeleton still bore the distinctive blue tint of youth, marking him as at least a decade away from warrior maturity. Yet there was something in his posture, an alertness, an awareness, that suggested he understood the significance of what was unfolding. Slowly, like ice melting under a gentle sun, the tension in the mess hall dissolved. Conversations resumed, first as whispers, then returning to normal volume. The maintenance drone, detecting that its intervention was unnecessary, moved away to attend to other tasks. A group of Eloran diplomats at a nearby table raised their luminescent hands in a traditional gesture of approval, their skin glowing briefly brighter. Kim met Krenvas's gaze across the room, and the adult Nadar inclined his head in acknowledgement. His once broken limb had healed completely, Nadar medical technology having fused the exoskeleton back to full strength. Beside him, Tik made a quick gesture with his smaller arms, a children's greeting that wasn't quite proper protocol, but conveyed a genuine enthusiasm that formal Nadar communication often lacked. "Your methods during the rescue were unorthodox," Toole said, returning to his seat opposite Kim. "No Nadar rescue team would have attempted entry through maintenance conduits." "We adapt to circumstances," Kim replied, beginning her meal with careful attention to Nadar dining customs, eating first from the right side of the plate, as was proper in their culture. "This adaptation, it is your species' strength," said another warrior, the one Kim now recognized as Toole's second-in-command. "Where we see established protocols, you see possibilities." Above them, the mess hall's environmental systems adjusted the temperature and atmospheric mix, creating subtle zones of comfort for each species present. The ship's AI had learned through countless interactions how to make these adjustments. Almost imperceptible, another small example of how different forms of life could share space without conflict. As Kim ate with the Nadar warriors, small conversations developed, careful at first, then gradually more natural. She explained human emergency response training, while they described the ancient warrior traditions that still governed Nadar society. Cultural barriers didn't disappear, but they became less important than the common ground being discovered. Across the mess hall, other crew members took notice. An Eloran diplomat hesitantly approached a table of human engineers, requesting permission to join them. 2 marine aquatic specialists invited a human xenobiologist to their water-surrounded seating area, offering a breathing apparatus designed for air breathers. Slowly, The strictly segregated eating patterns that had developed aboard the Unity began to shift. 3 days later, the Unity's captain approved a formal modification to the mess hall seating arrangement. Mixed species tables were designated throughout the space, with adaptive seating that could accommodate the various biological needs of different council races. The initiative was officially named Shared Horizons, but crew members simply called it Kim's Tables. 1 month afterward, when the Unity responded to a distress call from a damaged mining operation in the Cygnus Reach, the emergency teams deployed in mixed species units for the first time. Nadar's strength and human adaptability complemented each other perfectly, resulting in a rescue operation that succeeded beyond expectations. Commander Tul and Staff Sergeant Kim led the primary team, moving through the damaged facility with a coordination that suggested years of joint training rather than decades of cultural separation. When they returned to the Unity, both wore temporary breathing apparatus, Tul's damaged exoskeleton having been patched with components from a human environmental suit, while Kim utilized a modified Nadar respiratory system after her own was damaged. The child's drawing remained attached to Tul's honor sash, visible proof that understanding between species begins with recognizing courage across cultural divides. A small change, a single seat at a mess hall table, but one that rippled outward through the Unity and beyond, a testament to what became possible when ancient barriers finally fell. In the vast, dangerous universe, genuine cooperation had found its beginning. The end